We all got wind of this yesterday. I'm sure you know by now. We just mentioned it. The felony charges were dropped. How do you see this affecting him heading into the draft?
Do you want my honest opinion? I don't think it affects him very much at all, to be completely honest with you. As long as the story is what has been reported out there is true. I spoke to 4 or 5 teams, scouts from teams, within an hour of that news breaking there. And basically everybody kind of had the same feelings. They were like, we'll await judgment to see when all the information comes out. But if it's a bar fight, those things happen. Rare do we see it with a player like McKenna's stature before being drafted. And then if it's a bar fight where he's defending his mom in the hockey world, I don't think too many people are going to have too big a problem with that, especially now that the felony charges have been dropped.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show, and the stuff we had seen regarding what you're talking about, the bar fight, the mom being insulted, all that was kind of, oh, here's a screenshot of a text, or here's like the rumors going around. So it wasn't like officially reported, but it does seem to be that's the consensus on what happened. And like you said, I think most people around hockey see that. There's part of me that even thinks that helped his draft status with some teams. Because was there not some sort of a thought that he's a little bit soft? Maybe the way that some people in hockey think could see that and say, all right, there's a little more fight to him than we thought. I know it's crazy to even talk that way, but I think it's true.
I mean, I was inundated by people saying the same thing too, right? And those aren't NHL executives saying that too. I'm sure, and I should say that I didn't actually speak to any executives about this. I spoke to scouts from different teams. But if I was an executive when that first came out, I would same thing. I would wait until all the information came out and see where it led to before making any decisions. But my first concern would have been like, how is this going to affect his standing at Penn State? Is he going to be able to stay and play on that F1 student visa? Is he going to be able to travel back and forth across the border, right? Like if he has a criminal record, like those would be the big questions for me, is that if this felony charge continues, whether or not you agree with why it happened, it'd be more of the legality around what's his future going to look like immediately here. So now if we can just put that felony charge away, and he's going to still deal with some other things here, and he has that hearing on February 11th. I don't know if it's going to bump anybody, move the needle for any teams to be like, you know what? Yeah, that's the kind of jam we're looking for. More than what we saw really coming out of the World Junior break too, is that, he had 4 penalty minutes through his first 21 NCAA games. And then he ratcheted off 30 in 2 games. He had a couple of misconducts, and both of them were sticking up for teammates too, which I think that will ingratiate you more to NHL teams than maybe getting into a bar fight and saying like, oh, I can throw hands at midnight, versus like I have some jam in my game on the ice where it really matters. So I think he's starting to show that more on the ice, which is going to carry a lot more weight.
Do you think that, how his season started, how it's been going, and, kind of picking up in the last few weeks, that aspect of his game, do you think that is something's being said to him about like, hey, like regarding your draft, whether it's, coaches or his agent or anything, this is like, hey, people have these questions about you, about your game, and that he might be paying attention to that more and saying like, well, if I'm slipping down the board, quote unquote, that he wants to maybe exhibit some of those things that maybe are question marks?
I mean, I'm not a superstar athlete, but I hear what people say about me, and I'm not 17, 18 years old, right? Like these kids, as much as they want to be sheltered from the things that are said in the media and on social media and things like that, they're not. They're hearing it. Their family and friends are letting them know if they're missing it too. So he is well aware, I'm sure, that somehow he put up 2 points a game at the World Juniors, and suddenly his grip on number 1 had kind of slipped away. So he's certainly heard those things, I'm sure. And I don't know if anyone's telling him to improve on those things, or it's just, he's hearing the footsteps and he's like, I need to show these guys what I can do. Because I think if you had a frank conversation with him, he probably wasn't thrilled with his first half either. Like the points were pretty good, but I'm sure his expectation was higher, and that he thought that, or maybe not he thought, but he had hoped that he'd be able to run around a little more and maybe not dominate, but be like a high end player. And there were some puck luck issues there with Penn State early on, and he wasn't getting all the time at even strength with some of their better players too. So there were mitigating factors, but I'm sure he expected a little bit more from himself. And it's a difficult league though too, coming out of the West, the NCAA at his age. It is not an easy path to take. And so when in the summer there, when people were like, could he put up 75 points? I was like, let's pump the brakes. If he puts up 45 points, I think that that's going to be a huge win. And assuming that he doesn't get suspended from the team or miss any time due to this incident, I think he's going to get there. I think he's going to break 40. I think he can push up close to 45 with a strong back half as they lead up to the NCAA tournament here. And I think that that should be considered a really strong season. He just happens to run into a player in Ivar Stenberg, who is also having a historically strong season in the SHL, which has now made this a 2-horse race. If Ivar Stenberg had 13 points for Frölunda, this wouldn't be a discussion. People would be like, oh, McKenna's not lighting it up the way we liked or expected or hoped, but he's still number one. It's just that Stenberg has closed that gap with his great season.
So that was actually the next question I want to ask you. And you do have Stenberg as your number one on your consensus at eliteprospects.com. If we're taking away all the off the ice stuff about McKenna out of it, how close is that gap for you between Stenberg and McKenna? And, when you talk about just the hockey on its own, can you compare the two players for us?
Sure. Yeah. As far as how close they are for me personally, I mean, it's razor thin. I did the scout poll where I pulled 10 NHL teams. 6 had Ivar Stenberg at number 1. 4 had Gavin McKenna at number 1. So, looking at that too, very, very tight, just a 10 team sample, but still, I think it gives a good lens. As far as on ice play goes, McKenna has the superior pure offensive upside. His vision, his playmaking ability is notches above what Ivar can do. Stenberg, he really drives play. Very skilled player. Don't get me wrong. Like he very talented, first line type of skill. But he generates things through will and effort alone too. And so as an 18-year-old playing against men in the Swedish Hockey League, there is that he is able to do that at that level. And that's really, really impressive and indicates that it's going to be translatable to the NHL too. So, and if I'm looking at pure ceilings, I think that McKenna, I think it's still there that he could be like a Nikita Kucherov-like player, where you're not maybe going to love all of his off puck habits, his defensive zone efforts at times. But when you get him the puck in open ice or you put him on the power play, he's going to make you hurt. Whereas Stenberg, I think, will impact the game a little bit more at 5-on-5, maybe becomes even chips in on a penalty kill or something like that, but just a little more responsible, a little heavier, a little more physical, and then also brings that kind of point per game upside when we're looking at offense. So both really quality players, and it's kind of, you have to look at what your team needs. And then organizations will obviously have to decide, like, do you go a little bit safer and take the Swede, or do you swing big on the big upside and see if you get yourself somebody who could put up 115, 120 points one season?
As you look at the top of this draft, you said it's 2-horse race between Stenberg and McKenna. Yeah. Do you envision any team allowing McKenna, if he's not the number 1 pick, to fall beyond 2? Like, do you see anyone beyond those 2 guys that would make any kind of compelling case to be ahead of McKenna at this point for on ice?
Well,
stuff?
Yeah, I mean, before all this came out, after the World Juniors, he was number 4 on one team's list. So I'll say that. Not saying that team's going to be picking in the top 3, but I think that there is a world where there's a team at the top 1 or 2 that really wants a defenseman, and maybe they slide back and they get him, but maybe they just go, nuts to this. We're just going to take the guy that we really think is going to be the best defenseman, because we see it every year at the draft. Teams can't help themselves. Center and defense, they want it badly. It's rare that you see wingers really jump up high and hold up high positions. Now, at the top of draft, I think it's a little easier to make that concession when you feel like this is a tier. The top tier has Stenberg and McKenna. Well, we'll just take whichever one's sitting there if you're at number 2. But if you're like, say you're San Jose, who desperately would love to get another like blue chip defenseman in that pipeline. They really missed out on Matty Schaefer there last year. It's unfortunate for them, but could they do it? I mean, potentially it would be a bit of a surprise, because I do think it is legitimately like a full tier drop down, and you get to Keaton Verhoff and Jace Reed and Albert Smits and Carson Carls and Caleb Maholtra and Tynan Lawrence and all those guys. They're kind of in that next bracket down.
Well, right now, as we look at it from the Blackhawks angle, if everything falls the way it would be, mathematically favorable, the Hawks would pick 6th. You have right now Chase Reed, defenseman from the Sioux Greyhounds, as your 6th rated prospect for the draft. When you're looking at what Chicago has already on the blue line, it's Rinzel, Vlasic, Levshinov, Kaiser, Del Mastro, Korchinski. Up front, you've got Bedard, Frondell, Kanserov, Nazar, Lardis. Where do you think the Hawks should be looking at that point, and what sort of player do you think complements what they have?
Best player available. I mean, Chicago's pretty deep right now, right? Especially in the pipeline, and then U22 players on the roster. Is that you got a bit of everything, and I think that there was a mandate for a few years there. It's like, let's just load up on speed and skill, size be damned. And I think that that's shifting maybe a little bit. All right, now we've got a lot of speed and skill. Now let's load up on some heavier players who can still play, right? Like the Anton Frondell pick. I think that was perfect for them, is that he's a big body, and he also has a lot of skill, quality person too. So now it's just take who's number one on your board. And if it's a coin flip and you think, hey, we've got a little more defensive depth in our pipeline than we do up front, well, then we'll take the center. Maybe it's Tynan Lawrence at that spot at number 6, who's having a bit of a trouble adjusting to the NCAA. But maybe just go with Chase Reed, because there's a world where Chase Reed becomes the top defenseman in this crop. And I think that it's a very realistic outcome. We really, really like him in elite prospects. He's got size, he's got skating, he's on the right side. He could be a top power play guy. So there is certainly going to be a bevy of options at that number 6. And I think that that's a really unique spot too, because when you, like I said, is that you look at that top 2, and then after that, you could probably bunch 8 guys in right after that, all the way to number 10. And so that sitting at 6, you're going to have a pick of a handful of players that you should probably be very interested in.
Well, at the moment, the Blackhawks have 2 first-round picks, and that has kind of changed over the last 24 hours. But with the Florida pick, if it's outside the top 10, Blackhawks keep it. When you look at the first round, let's say Florida doesn't make the playoffs, and there's someone within that 10 to 15 range, who do you like the most in that range? As a guy that maybe is not getting that top tier attention, but is deserving of it.
He's starting to get a little bit of buzz in that top 10 discussion, but because of his season, so I'm going to say Oscar Hemming is a really interesting player. You know, he had the issue with the Finnish Ice Hockey Federation and wasn't allowed to play here, wasn't allowed to play there, and now finally he's made his way to college hockey, and hasn't scored a goal yet. I believe he's just got 8 assists, but he is big. He's fast. He's super young for this class. I don't know if he has like clear first line upside, but like top 6 upside. We were having a discussion in the Slack there at EP, and somebody brought up Alex Tuck, and I was like, that's an interesting comparable. Maybe a bit of a less goal scoring version, maybe like the 25 goal scoring version of Alex Tuck, where he flies, he can be heavy on the forecheck, he can make plays, and like the way he's making plays right now at BC, at Boston College, it's been really, really impressive, especially for a super young player coming in mid-season. Really impressed with him. So if he's sitting there hanging around that kind of 12 to 15 zone, I think he'd be a great pick.
6'4", 198. So tall and lanky for now, but he's only 17 years old, and you'd imagine playing for a program like Boston College, he's going to bulk up. He's going to get that full, all the nutrition, all the attention you need to fill out that frame. That is very tempting. I'm a big fan of Viggo Bjork. I thought he was amazing in the World Juniors. I know he's a smaller forward, and if we're talking about the Blackhawks here, you're looking at an organization full of sort of small forwards. Talk me into him or out of him, depending on where you think he's going to be, so I'm not too crushed.
I'm never going to say a bad word about Viggo Bjork. I love this kid. Like I love the player. I love the person. He's everyone I've spoken to about him too, and I've been around him a little bit myself, is they just rave about him. Marcus Kruger over there, and he plays with him in Djurgården. He's captaining that team, and I had a chat with him when I was over in Sweden earlier in the year, and he was just glowing. He's like, this kid is 17. He's racing out of practice to go to geometry class, and he's the hardest work on the ice. He might be the smartest player on the ice on any given night. I loved him at the World Juniors too. He was my vote for MVP. I think he is a terrific player, and that if you're going to bet on an undersized center, I'm betting on him all day. The problem is that he's an undersized center and he doesn't have electric feet. So, a guy like Marco Rossi, when he came through, he had great speed too, right? Whereas Viggo really, really relies on his brain, and it is a big brain. So it's working. He's doing well. He's playing first line minutes for Djurgården there over in the SHL. I think he's going to be a player, but if you're going to have him, it's either you got to find a way to put him on the wing, or you need him to be kind of behind a really heavy number 1 center. And so with Bedard there and Anton being there too, it's like he doesn't fit the third line center role. So you're going to have to carve out a spot for him on the wing somewhere. But again, I bet big on talent and smarts. I imagine there's going to be a few teams that are hanging around kind of that 8 to 12 zone that are going to take a good long look at him. I was a little surprised that NHL teams rated him so highly on that scout poll too, because traditionally teams shy away from those type of players, even if they're really talented like he is. But there's numerous teams who had him in their top 10 too. So I don't imagine he's going to last too long, but we'll see. Once the playoffs kick back in and teams are reminded like, oh, right, you need to be big and heavy and the whistles go away in spring, I could see Viggo's stock slipping a little bit.
Well, you had a chance to keep a close eye on Anton Frondell at World Juniors. He was great, named forward to the tournament. We expect him to join the Hawks this year if Djurgården doesn't go far, which I think would be a bit of a surprise for people. What have you liked? Let me ask you this. Like, since the draft, how has your opinion changed on Frondell?
So first off, like, he might be my favorite player I've ever been around, like just hanging around. Like him and Victor Eklund are just a hoot. They're so much fun. I got to hang out with them when I was in Stockholm earlier in the fall. They were so gracious with their time. We were out on the ice together, fiddling around. And I'll tell you one thing, that guy shot, like, until you're on the ice with him, feeding him one-timers, like, I was like, oh my goodness. And like, he's doing one-handed backhands from like the top of the circle, and they're going, I can't even get it off the ice. I'm just like embarrassing myself. I'm like, oh, I thought I had like old man strength on you. You're 17, 18 years old. And they're like, well, how is this even possible? He is so strong. He's so talented. I think he's doing very well with Djurgården this year. I think it's just going to be a little bit before we see the finished product with him. And I've always felt that way. You know, he's a very physically mature player, but I think his game is going to need some rounding out, and it's going to take some time. He's going to take a little bit of adjustment. When he's 24 years old, I think he's going to be an absolute horse for the Blackhawks. Like, he's going to be one of those guys that teams are going to be game planning against. Like, how do we get away from him on the matchup defensively? And how are we going to stop that shot on the power play or off the rush? Because it is just such a lethal weapon. And when he figures out like that he can really dominate physically too, I think it's going to be scary. He's going to be a very, very good player.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cam, thanks so much for your time, man. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure you're following Cam on Twitter at hockey_Robinson, and of course, subscribe to Elite Prospects. We are still in lottery pick mode as Blackhawks fans. Elite Prospects is the most valuable resource. I'm on there 50 times a day. So, Cam, we appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, fellas.